Well, we're privileged to have another guest from the Project 21 organization. Now, this is a group of African Americans who don't think that Al Sharpton is really representing the black people of this country. And that same goes for Jackson. When the media wants to know what's going on, they go to them rather than to some rather bright people who make up this Project 21 organization. Derryck Green is out on the left coast, so we're taping this program because of the time differential. And he'll be talking today about the knockout game. Remember that? We'll also be talking primarily today about those job numbers that came out last week and whether or not they're real and what they really mean. Stay tuned.
It's time for the Newsmaker Show on News Talk AM 1480 WLEA. Here's Kevin Torrance.
Derryck, how you been, brother? Huh?
I've been good. Yourself?
Good, very good. As you said before we went on the air, the Christmas spirit, except, a lot of people who've suffered losses around Christmas time or any time, when the family is smaller. It's tough, very, very tough for them. But you are a young dude, right?
I'd like to think so.
How old are you, Derryck?
I'm 38.
Oh, well, yeah, that's young compared to some of us. But, you probably feel like you're in your 20s. Am I right?
Some days I feel like I'm in my 20s, other days my 60s. It just depends.
Well, I'm not going to give away my age, but I'm a lot older than you, and I feel like I'm in my 20s. I mean, my body says, no, you're not in your 20s, pal, but mentally that's the way I feel, and I've done a lot of, not research, but talked to a lot of people about it, and I guess what happens is your brain matures when you're in your 20s, and you sort of stop there. Your body, and sadly, keeps right on going, But your brain, that's it. So I don't mean you can't learn more, but that's when you mature. Listen, those jobless numbers last week, 7% unemployment. Do you believe that?
No, I don't.
Tell me.
I don't believe that because primarily the reason I don't believe it is because of the report that came out last month that said that members of the Census Bureau were falsifying the survey reports that were sent to the BLS to accurately indicate how many Americans were employed and how many Americans weren't employed. And so because of those falsification numbers, which took place prior to last year's election, in August of last year, the unemployment rate it went from 8.1% to 7.8% right before the election from August to September. And that was a huge jump because the numbers prior to then didn't indicate that there was going to be such a large drop in the unemployment. But it came out that the numbers were manipulated to help President Obama in his election process, or re-election process, I should say, to the presidency. But that report also didn't indicate that the falsification of unemployment numbers stopped. So as far as we know, it could have continued since then. And if it has, the numbers of Americans who are unemployed far exceed the numbers in which the BLS are giving us. And there hasn't been really much of a condemnation or, saying that it wasn't true from the White House, other people. So it's kind of interesting how that laid the foundation. So I don't believe that the unemployment rate is 7%, as it was currently given to us last Friday. I think the number is much, much higher.
Do you have an idea, Derryck, of what it might be?
I don't. I would like to say that considering the amount of Americans who are out of the workforce, which is over 10 million, since the president took office in 2009, the numbers of Americans, which totals 47 million on food stamps or welfare, the numbers of Americans who are getting Social Security disability benefits, which totals almost 11 million, the numbers of Americans who are still getting unemployment, I would think the numbers are probably double what they say that they are. It's taking all those factors into consideration.
So you're talking about probably 14%.
I would say 14 or 15%. Again, and we have to take that also into consideration with the number of jobs that have been created versus the amount of population increase as well. So I think the number is probably around 15% unemployment. Maybe even higher.
Okay. Now, in the black community, and you are in that community, although you're very well educated, I think you're also a reverend, aren't you?
Almost.
Okay, almost a reverend. All right. Derryck and I have talked several times. You can tell we have kind of a little kidding going back and forth. But in the black community, Derryck, I don't remember which network it was, but sometime over this past weekend, a network came out and said it was 12.4% unemployment, which would make it almost double what the rest of the country is going through. But by your measurements, it's much, much higher than that, right?
Right. They said 12.4, it's 12.5% for blacks, 35.8% for black teens. Now, again, if these numbers have continued to be falsified, both of these percentages in their respective demographics are much higher than they indicate. If we take the 12.5% on its face, it's only the fourth time since President Obama has been in office since 2009 that the black unemployment rate has been below 13%. If we take the 35.8% of black teen unemployment, we still have 55, 56 months of black teen unemployment above 35%. It's never been below 35% since the president's been in office. I mean, these are two numbers, that are having devastating effects on the black community, and for black support of the president to still be as high as it is concerning.
I'm talking with Derryck Green. I didn't bother to get all your credentials, Derryck, but why don't you just mention your background education-wise and what you're doing now, and you plan to be a minister? Go ahead and tell me that.
Well, I received my master's at Fuller Seminary in Pasadena, and I'm currently a doctoral candidate at Azusa Pacific in theology and ministry. And I am in the process of writing my dissertation now, after which we'll see if the Lord is calling me to full-time ministry in the pulpit or continuing doing what I'm doing now.
Well, Derryck, as I look back, and I'm afraid I can look back a lot farther than you can, as I look back, the leaders of the black community, when the civil rights struggles were beginning in the 50s and 60s, came from the ministerial class.
A number of factors. I think the main factor, in my opinion, in my research, has gone, it's kind of centered in the late 50s, specifically in the 1960s, at which point government came in and started giving the black community, in my opinion, a form of reparations for discrimination, slavery, things of that nature, giving the black community provisions, whether they're monetary, whether it was through affirmative action, whether it's through housing. And I think black Americans substituted their traditional and very reverent respect for God and put government in its place. And I think since blacks have conditioned themselves to, in essence, worship at the altar of government, we've seen the family disintegrate quicker between 1965 and today than any time in history. We see a sharp increase in violent crime. We see sharp increases in illegitimacy. Educational standards have gone down. So I think a lot of dependence upon government are partially responsible for the disintegration of black America.
Yeah. Well, now it's happening in all sections of our society, is it not?
Yes, it is. And as a larger society, that's even more reflective of not only government's role in Americans' lives, but it also shows, in my opinion, the weakness of the church to stand up to that and saying, listen, we are still the moral arbiters of the arc, so to speak, of moral values that kind of pertain to that aid themselves in cultural living and civility. And so with the weakened church and its ever-strengthening government, not only is it happening in the black community, but it's happening in America as a whole, and that's sad.
That's right, all across society. But, if you really want to see what happens, in my opinion, I want your reaction, if you want to see what happens when the government starts handing things out and taking charge, look at the Native American population. And then you can go to the black population. There was one tribe in the South, I'm not sure if it was the Cherokees. Are you familiar with this? There was one tribe in the South, and not the whole bunch, not everyone who was a Cherokee, but this one particular tribe. If I say the Carolinas, I'm sort of guessing, but that comes to my mind, in South Carolina, maybe Georgia. They refused to have any kind of government assistance, going way back, to when it was search and destroy and put them on reservations. Going way back, they said, no, we don't want that. Now they're doctors, lawyers, professional people of other types, business leaders in very prosperous communities in this one little section in the South. So what would have happened if the government had not stepped in with all the welfare programs?
Well, I don't think that the black family would be in such disarray today as it is. I think that black men and women would have gotten married in greater numbers a lot sooner, have their children within wedlock. I think the parents would have been much more active in the quality of education that their children received. I think that with two parents around and a firm, stable family system, firm, stable moral system, I think that the incidence of violent crime would have been much less today than it is. I think that the incarceration rate amongst black Americans, specifically black males, would be much, much lower. So I think that I think we saw some of those patterns that were beginning to happen prior to the 1960s. Right? You start seeing the unemployment rates between blacks and whites, I would say right before the 1960s, early in the 1900s, on par with that of whites. So I think there's certain elements that show that in the black community, we were going in the right direction despite the codified racism and discrimination that blacks experienced. They still were going in the right direction in terms of having stable family units and communicating traditional values to their children. But with the government being involved, like you said, if you look at those reservations, you see what happens when the government gets involved, and anybody can go into the inner cities. I call inner cities black plantations or black reservations, because the inner cities, with as much government influence, whether it's in Detroit, whether it's in Chicago, St. Louis, they kind of manifest the same type of characteristics that we find on reservations that are run and controlled by the federal government.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. We're going to take a break. We'll be back in just a moment.
Cy Surefine Food Mart saves you money by being the most convenient supermarket. Parking is close to the front doors, and their variety-filled yet simple store layout helps you save time and money by not encouraging you to buy all those things not on your list. And their weekly specials are superb. Here's Larry Jones with just a few of this week's sale items.
Well, thank you, Stanley. Hey, this week at Size, folks, get ready for Christmas with Surefine whole boneless hams, just $1.99 a pound. Juicy, tender sirloin steaks, $3.98 a pound. Francisco Rinaldi spaghetti sauce and pasta sauce, 5 jars, $5. And Vitel Italiano assorted spaghetti and pasta. Get 2 1-pound bags for just $1.
Size Surefine definitely has the best meats in the Canastilla Valley, with only U.S. raised beef cut right in their stores at either location, Arkport or Canastillo. Like them on Facebook or see their ad online at SizeSurefine.com. Thank you very much.
It's the Newsmaker Show on AM 1480 WLEA.
Derryck Green is my guest, and Derryck is a very well-educated fellow. He's on the West Coast, but he hasn't been corrupted by those left coasters. Now, you must stand out.
They kind of have condescending remarks, but what's interesting is the condescension doesn't really hide as well the questions that they ask inevitably. So how could you believe something like that? That doesn't make any sense. And then you have a rapid fire of questions. And to me, I just think that they want to have these positions explained to them, because sometimes they just don't take the time to think some of these positions all the way through.
Okay, I should have introduced Derryck in part 2 of the show. He's with Project 21, a group of very well educated in most cases, well educated, well spoken, articulate, which is the same thing, Kevin. What else would I say? Highly accomplished. There we go. Black folks who do not think that Jesse and Al Sharpton are the answer to the problems for American blacks. In fact, they may be exacerbating it. But I suppose if I were black living in the inner city, I might be attracted to, well, not Jesse. He's kind of passé now, but Al Sharpton. I suppose, if you weren't thinking too deeply on it, he might make sense to you. What about all this knockout game stuff that we're all hearing about now? Even the mainstream networks are reporting it. What's that all about?
Well, the knockout game, in my opinion, is just the latest type of, iteration of black violence that has gotten the attention of mainstream media. First, we had what the media sanitized as flash mobs, and that was when coordinated efforts of black teens would descend on specific places, cause property damage, loot. If it was a department store, they would loot the stores. They call them crash and rob, that type of thing. And then there was just a version of that violence called apple picking, and that was when juveniles, regardless of the color, but a lot of the perpetrators were black, would go on unsuspecting victims and steal their Apple products, whether it's an iPhone, an iPad, a laptop, things of that nature. Now we have what we call the knockout game, which isn't new, but it's gotten the attention of the mainstream media, and it's black violence, and it's these juvenile, these thugs, as you rightly called them, by the way, who are walking up on unsuspecting victims, primarily white, and trying to knock them out in one punch. This game used to be called One Hitter Quitter. Aside from being called the knockout game, it's also called polar bear hunting, which in and of itself, if we had courageous law enforcement people, these perpetrators who were caught, participating in this game would be charged with a hate crime. But they're going on to unsuspecting victims, like I said. They're white, and they're trying to just knock them out with one punch. And it's, excessively violent. It's gruesome. And I think that the law enforcement needs to take strong, proactive positions to prevent these types of knockouts, if you want to call them that. And then if and when the perpetrators are caught, they have to be given stiff sentences to show that reflect the seriousness of what they're doing. And what your friend said about the knifing incident, I think that with this type of, unsuspecting violence that can happen to anybody, regardless of color, but in this case specifically white Americans, this is a case that people should be using to advance, CCWs, the concealed carry weapons permits, because if these guys are going to go up and attack innocent people, if a person has a gun, they can defend themselves. There was an example a couple of weeks ago where a guy tried to knock out a black youth tried to knock out a white guy, and he pulled out his gun and shot him twice. These type of things to allow Americans to self-police and then defend themselves, I think that's a very good argument for CCWs.
Well, it might cause the thugs to think twice. What happened to the guy that shot the thug?
He was arrested.
Yeah, well, there you go. So.
No, I mean, not the guy. The thug was arrested. Actually.
Oh, he was? Okay.
Charged. Yeah, he was arrested.
All right.
And that's good, But like you said, even though Sharpton has come out and spoken against the knockout game, just knowing Sharpton's history and his lack of character, you're right. He would come out and protest and claim racism, claim all these types of different slanderous charges against people who decided to defend themselves without condemning the violent act of the black juvenile.
Derryck Green, stay on the line for just a moment. How do people read your stuff? Are you a blogger?
I am. They can find my information either on project21.org or they can go to my blog site, which is derryck.green.net, and it's spelled DERRYCK, green like the color, .net.
Or project21.org, where they'll see other people, too.
Or project21.org. That's correct.
Okay, thanks again. Stay on the line, Derryck. That's it for today's show. Now stay tuned for more news and information throughout the day on AM 1480 WLEA. WLEA. WLEA.